please join me in welcoming Tim Flach to the stage.
So, well, thank you for coming here. I'm going to be discussing really aspects of perception at a time when photography, we have to question how to depict animals to make them more empathetic, how we make people care more. We're at a point of the Anthropocene where things are being shaped by us. And of the global wildlife population in the world, something like 73% have declined in the last 50 years. So there's an urgency to question how to effectively communicate better around the natural world. My books are very much the point where I engaged and spent a few years obsessing about different aspects or different species. And these obviously go into different languages. But the key is, how do we make images work? How do we make them connect to the viewers and tell the stories? How do telling stories to create bridges to understanding and to think about them and, in a sense, transport ourselves into the shoes or the paws of other animals. So this is Paris, Museum of Natural History. So a lot of these projects involved, for the museums, and involved a lot of school children. I think 300,000 school children went to this particular museum in Kunming. And it was really, again, it's really, I feel like I'm a witness to the extinction of, a lot of the species that find them on the edge of extinction. And I'm a witness to that. And so, as a photographer, we're often the storytellers of those experiences. This is Spain, Austria, and this is Cartagena in Colombia. So I've been fascinated on how we interpret pictures. So here we have a fruit bat. There's good bat and there's bad bat. There's Batman, the vigilante, putting the fear of God into the criminal world. And then there's Dracula, the blood-sucking vampire. So the way these cultural layers work, the way that we imbue something and meaning, is something that I find fascinating. And I want to discuss how we project that. But what's interesting, as you view these pictures, that actually they're upside down. And the thing is that we predict that normally the eyes are above the feet. And so what we're doing is we're, in a sense, manifesting them to be more human. And you can imagine that bat giving the other one a bit of earache. It's sort of like, and what's extraordinary is that a lot of what we manifest is from inside out. And I'm going to cover that later. But symbolism is such an important point. So here we have a dove, a symbol of purity, love, the Holy Spirit in Christian theology. Yet the pigeons outside, described by, I think, Ken Livingstone as flying rats, are genetically the same. This idea that there's a sort of, that they are the same species, but fundamentally have different meaning. Ambiguity is a very important aspect of any art form, trying to untangle the disambiguation. Here we have a day 85 horse embryo. It almost looks like it's smiling. You wonder if it's dead or live. But that's part of the very process, the mystery, you might say. Here we have a horse, which is obviously a horse, but it could be your Christmas holiday. It could be that point where it's the slippage. So in child psychology, they have this concept of the Goldilocks theory, the relationship between simplicity and complexity. Now, interestingly enough, it's finding that point But of course, audiences have different experiences, so you've got to plot that just at the point where it's exciting enough, but it's not too predictable. And that means you can't be someone trying to organize experiences. I think it was Walter Benjamin that said the arts are the organization of experiences. So that idea that we are actually organized experience means you've got to imagine what it is to be in someone else's boots. You can't be locked in this bony vault, the skull, and this brain that's got some wetware, pushing out your thoughts and constructing your worlds. So this is the behind scenes in the Royal Yard of Ajman. And the picture presents you with something that is a desert. It's a halter horse. So halter horses are they're like supermodels of the equine world. They're not ridden. They're just to look good. And it's presented like in a painting, but it's inside a stable. But what I'm doing is I'm consciously playing with subconscious associations. So the painting by George Stubbs called Whistle Jacket has exactly the same color horse, the sclera, and the wars. And what I'm doing is I'm playing with multiple layers of experiences. That is why, if you're a communicator, you've got to be interested in how other people transform something into meaning. So looking at this, the first thing you probably go, oh my goodness, has he plucked the chicken? I promise you it's a naturally occurring scaleless chicken, but that is the first point. Then the next point really is it looks a bit like a plump ballerina going across the stage and cannily looking back to you, the viewer. But it brings a lot of interesting questions about how we engage with an image. Tim Coulson, the professor of zoology at Cambridge University at the time, and his colleagues published a paper saying, why should conservationists heed Pokemon? They presented 100 cards of British wildlife and 100 of Pokemon characters, and they took them to British school children between 4 and 11 years old. Unfortunately, the recognition of the Pokemon characters way outweighed British wildlife. So we are at a point where we've never been so separated in many ways in our understanding of the natural world, at the time when we have to connect. And that's really the theme of this talk. How do we connect people to the natural world? Because if we don't, I don't believe we have a future. And that is at a time of emerging technologies which are fundamentally creating paradigm shifts in the way we understand our reality and perhaps the pollution of the erosion of trust from that. When I did my book in 2017 on endangered animals, I reached out to social scientists who'd been doing research on how pictures of animals actually effectively worked. The most prominent of them was Linda Kaloff at Washington State University and her doctoral student at the time, Cameron Whitley. They had done experiments in museum settings, but we then collaborated together on papers that examined what would National Geographic pictures of iconic animals look like in terms of how would people respond to those versus pictures of animals that were quite anthropomorphic and a group that wouldn't see any animal pictures and would be asked questions. I won't go into the detail of it, but surprisingly, the pictures of romantic, distant, non-human world of animals in wildlife didn't do very well. In fact, they did no better than the people who saw no pictures of animals. And the pictures that had portraits of animals on black backgrounds evoked a very high level of empathy, which has been shown to lead to conservation. Interesting, they also felt uneasy about the pictures. So this is another strange contradiction or paradox. It's not about necessarily pleasing people to make them care to act. This could be from, I think it was Angry Birds. I haven't played that for a while. I think the ringleader was a northern cardinal. I posted this on my social media, and someone said it looks like Elvis Presley. And I thought it looked more like a sort of First World War pilot with his cap on. This Inca tern from Peru. Now, apparently, bigger the moustache, the more food you manage to get, more fish, I guess. But also, thereby, the sexier you are, if you're to the other birds, of course. So this is some behind scenes. So I had done a small set in my studio with a duck, and I thought the reflections were so cool, I wanted to expand that into a bigger set. So what I did is I did this group of flamencos. Apparently it's called a flamboyance, actually, a group of flamencos. And you get these beautiful, almost painterly forms that are caught with a high-speed flash. Now, these were one of the few pictures that the pandemic actually enabled me to take. Many times I've denied access. This is sea life, and my friend there, who was a curator there, allowed me to set up flash. These guys, the Gento penguins, they go more than 30 miles an hour, and the speed limit outside my studio is only 20 miles an hour, so they'd be in trouble if they were going down the highway. Okay, so this fascinates me. This is an idea about when you look to each other, believe it or not, you look slightly to one side, you look 75% to one side of a human face. We do most of our interaction, literally, we are biased in the way we look to the face. And this is a sort of heat color graph of it, but where the red is, you predominantly go there. Now, this has a huge and profound effect on the way we engage with imagery, space, design. In the early 60s, the first work was by Arbus, and this is a wireframe of they're called saccades. They're points that we take, approximately 4 to 5 points in a second. Now, the area we see is remarkably small, but before I go and try to show that, this Hungarian pulley, which I call a flying mop, it does look a bit like a mop, doesn't it? At the moment, it looks relatively symmetrical. Now, if I flip it, now I haven't changed it, it's no longer symmetrical. Now, I'm going to try and show exactly why that is. So, it's symmetrical, flip it, no longer. It's got to do with your bias that naturally makes you go camera left. Now, what happens is that our understanding, although I've got that in the facial area of the brain, the fusional facial area, which is on the sides here, you have a bias. One side kicks in a bit more response than the other and causes you to naturally to go one way. The head is somewhere down on the right-hand side of the Hungarian pulley. So this is the one I wanted to show and demonstrate my point. Please take a look at that, and now. Okay. So, who found the window in the top right-hand corner? Not many of you did. Isn't it crazy? Now, if I'd flipped the picture around, you would have found it in seconds. And the reason for that is I'm going to show you, and it's crazy. And you're going to be thinking I'm going to be playing tricks all the way through here, but let me go on. So, these are called the saccades, and I'm going to demonstrate. If you hold your thumb in front of you and look at your thumbnail, see what a small area. Now, you only make, with your thumb, about 4 to 5 points in a second. So the question is, how can you see the whole room? You only see 1 degree angle, approximately, that is from the fovea sharp. Thereafter, it goes progressively blurred and then goes black and white, not even color. We do a lot of filling in. And this has a lot of implications in the arts, because let's say you weren't doing the filling in, these pictures wouldn't be illusions of a panda, they would just be colored dots on the screen. It's because we're very good at literally manifesting the illusion of the picture. So this is a crude idea that this is about how blurred it would be if you took about 2 seconds time duration, By the way, when we go into a gallery, I think research shows you only spend 8 seconds looking at a painting, even when you're interested. So this is a bit of... So going forward to the next one, I'm going to do the same. This is about 12 seconds, which is probably beyond the average amount of time that you would spend looking at a picture, painting or photograph. These red spots represent literally your thumb stretched out. The point being is it's quite extraordinary to imagine. Obviously, there is spectator distance between the artwork, but to a moderate-sized bit of art, we are very busy. I think Anil Seth was the one that really sort of is a neuroscientist talking about how we create a controlled hallucination, and when someone else agrees on your controlled hallucination, that becomes reality. So here, you see the points give you a bit more view, but you haven't got the window yet. And that's because we naturally go up the left-hand side. When we spend more time on the left-hand side, camera left, it becomes more emotionally charged. And that's really the kind of thread of the talk. I'm going to go through different aspects in which we make connection and which we make it emotionally charged. Now, this one you might find is down there. You see? The pheasant down the bottom. This is from my book, Dogs, Gods. So when I do a picture, I actually orchestrate it so that the energy of the picture flows even with a bit of saliva. It may just look like a random thing, but what it's doing is it's driving you round the dynamic, and it's making it more energy. It creates more engagement, emotion. This lowland western gorilla called Jala, who I met in Portland, Kent, in about 5 years before I took this picture. In the meanwhile, Jala, who'd been rescued when his family were butchered in the Congo, was kept at Portland for about 20 years. Then Daniel Aspinall decided to release him back into the Gabon. So he's a lowland western gorilla, which means he goes down the waterways. He's not as easy to find as the mountain gorillas. I finally caught up with him after about 2 weeks and found the very same gorilla who looked so much healthier. And since he is bred, which is one of the sort of criteria for reintroduction. But the picture, I made a simple change. Have a look at the picture. All I've done is added a drop of water and changed the contrast so it goes to the camera left, where we tend to look at another human face, and it just makes it more emotionally charged. I'll do that again. So I'm going to show you these illusions, which are crazy. Right. Even if I tell you that this Minecraft landscape, right, the cube, the top one, and the bottom one are the same value. But we can't see it any other way. Our predictive prior, this is like our generative model in our head, our map, our perceptual prior is telling us it's got sun because there's a shadow. So we presume that the top, you'll compensate for that because you assume light's coming from above down. And then we have an inability to see gradual changes of tone, but are heightened to edges and lines. So the line here, or the bottom cue, is actually going brighter gradually, and our eyes don't see it, and they're the same. Isn't that nuts? Absolutely nuts. So an artist can make something look lighter and darker without making it lighter and darker, by just understanding the edges and forms. Hence, a line drawing works. Margaret Livingston's probably the foremost person. I think she worked with Bell, who won the Nobel Prize for his work on perception. She's saying here, visual systems are selectively sensitive to discontinuities and not to gradual changes in luminance. So luminance is value, discontinuity is literally the edges or lines. Another, called the checker shadow illusion, is again that we predict that there's a black and white kind of board, and we also predict there's a shadow where you see B, but they're the same as well. So what I'm trying to say is that we are busily filling our worlds in in sense that we're doing it from our own experiences. And that really brings the question that if we're building this illusion and constructing the worlds around us, how do we then imagine how other people are imagining and manifesting? The challenge to transport yourself into the shoes of other people. Cuteness is another powerful thing, something that was a bit discarded as not a serious subject, but cuteness has a lot of implications. This axolotl, a salamander from Mexico, a critically endangered species, though quite common in captivity, can grow back parts of its limbs and its brain. It can also decide when it's a state of neotic, wants to go from a juvenile state to an adult state. What's really interesting is this has what Comrade Lorenz called the Kinderschema, which is this concept of a template of cuteness. Now, what makes this so interesting, I'm just going to, this is Morten Krindelbach, who's one of the professor, well, no, he's actually given, he gave a talk here on neuroscience and the mind, and we collaborated on the cuteness section together. It says, cuteness can be a positive, powerful, and even revolutionary force that shapes how we interact with each other and other animals. The caregiving, the cuteness, by the way, I'm in one of these onesies as well. It's a reintroduction program in China. But if you look at the forehead, it's very big. The eye patches help make the eyes look bigger. The chin is very small. So this is from my book, Feline, coming out later in the month. It's my assistant, Matt, at the bottom, or ex-assistant, and a 4-month-old baby. Look at the forehead. It's the same sort of template as the axolotl. Big forehead, round forms. But what's really interesting is the orbital frontal cortex, the bit in orange, is an area that responds only to infant faces, kittens, puppies, babies, and does not respond to adults. And it does this at a 1/7 of a second, which is faster than conscious thought. So when you're there playing with a puppy or kitten, it's working on you before you are thinking logically. It is. So cuteness has lots of implications. When my assistant and me were in Japan, there were these ballards in the road with cute animals on them. They have a culture called kawaii in Japan. And the road rage apparently went down significantly when they introduced these cute figurines. There's all sorts of implications to health. But here's my kitten, Loki, and he has the same, cats are cutest at 4 weeks, puppies at 8 weeks. There's a whole kind of... So I wanted to explore some pictures. This one's one of mine of a horse embryo, day 30, which looks almost like any kind of baby. But I wanted to explore pictures, not my own pictures, that have created the change of course of wars, approaches to the immigration crisis from Syria, refugees, and others that puncture our consciousness, that touch us. Roland Barthes talked about this idea of the punctum. It literally, something goes oomph like that, and you can't avoid it. So I wanted to really talk about how you bring this world, this otherness to sameness, how you bridge through that. So these albatrosses are on an island that you think you'll be okay, 2,000 kilometers away from human habitation on the Midway Atoll in the North Pacific Ocean. And yet, they are dying because of us, because the parents see these colored bits of plastic, which are all around the sea there, and think they're food, and feed them to the chicks. Now, the point I want to make is this. It's not that it's the carcass, it's the fact if you opened your fridge up, you might see a similar bottle top, plastic bottle top. It's making nature personal. And that is the key. Not necessarily it's making things relatable that is the key to any form of action. Brett Sturton's picture here has almost a Christian iconography to it, and that's why it became such a powerful picture. The story behind it is because there were some gangs doing illegal charcoal burning, and the government had put pressure on them. They sadly killed these guerrillas as a statement to try and ward off the government. But this is the picture which was to run in National Geographic and be one of the most significant pictures of that year. Now, I don't know, I'm sure you're familiar with Nick Ute's shot from the Vietnam War. Again, it's the shared commonality of those expressions, the vulnerability of the girl, that was the punch of the consciousness and changed the views back in America to the Vietnam War, was the catalyst. More recently, with the Syrian crisis, this Alan Kurdi, which is a 2-year-old boy that sadly drowned, including his mother and his brother, trying to get to a better life. And this is a paramilitary policeman picking him up. And this picture was to have a significant effect on world leaders. Cameron, overnight, changed the Syrian refugee allowance. So did Merkel, and so did the Canadian Prime Minister. Overnight. Why does that picture and the thousands of horrendous pictures change? Very simple. It's just a detail. The Velcro shoes that we as a parent can imagine putting the shoes on our child. And that is the punctum. That is something that makes that transformative. Whether the photographer knew what they were doing, not necessarily. So I wanted to move towards this idea of empathy. I know this guy looks a bit like J.J. Tolkien's Hobbit character, Gollum. It's actually a chimp with alopecia. Because it's ambiguous, you're trying again to unthread. Is it human? I'm not used to seeing chimpanzees with no hair. You've got that little scar of blood on the top, and your brain starts processing that. Now, I wanted to bring the attention to an extraordinary lady called Patricia Moore, an industrial designer that did a rather extreme experiment in empathetic experiment. She made herself have the sensory capacity of an 85-year-old when she was only 26. She wanted to know what it would be like to open a fridge with arthritic hands. What would it be like? She had glasses she could barely see through. She had bindings that made it difficult for her to walk. She wanted to know what would it be like to try and peel a potato with the kind of equipment that was available at the time. And what happened was she was transformed design by placing herself as a young woman in that of the shoes of an old person. Another incident some years later was she had, as part of the Disability Act, they had brought in the governors of all the states in America. And to their horror, these governors were told all these wheelchairs came out. And she made every governor sit in a wheelchair and stay there. They weren't obviously very obliging, but they stayed there for the whole day. And as a result of them finding they couldn't access things, the Disability Act was passed in the United States. The ability to put yourself in the shoes of someone else is hugely important in every aspect, not just industrial design. As she said, to empathize means to feel and to understand that a person in front of you is going through. This is a picture of the dying moments of the caretaker saying his goodbye to the last northern white male rhino in the world, an animal that roamed for millions of years. And this caretaker spends more time with this rhino than his own family. This is done by Amy Vatali. Now, Amy Vatali is an extraordinary National Geographic photographer who I only had to my studio a couple of days ago by chance. We've been working on a a project she called Vital Impact. And actually, Jane Goodwill is part of that project. So we've been in discussion with Jane, raising funds through our art, and she's bringing together a community of photographers, conservation photographers. And it's very sad that Jane is no longer with us, but she was an extraordinary person. And her mission, not just as an ethnologist and a primatologist, a world leader, was to understand how to make us care and how us to feel and to recognize that those sentient beings have so many commonalities with us. These bonobos, a bit like chimpanzees, are matriarchal. You get that sense of that tenderness of gesture. But I must point out that as we interpret as human, as an animal, this is probably a dominative female over a diminutive, submissive one. But the point is we have to deal with it as human and how we look at it. This could be cosmetic surgery, couldn't it? This is a Yunnan snub-nosed monkey. And see that peculiar nose? That's so it can survive at the highest altitude of any primate. But what I wanted to look at, even a big animal, look at those delicate eyelashes. One of my books was called Endangered. And what I was looking at was animals that find themselves on the edge of extinction. This is a Shafaka lemur from Madagascar. It makes the sound Shafaka, hence its name. The body language is very evocative of, say, a child in a classroom. It's got that body language we can relate to. Certain animals like these, the red crown cranes from China and Japan, a symbol of long life and fidelity, and also, ironically, good luck, were down to less than the number in this photograph in the 1920s, and are now only 3,000. If you think of the iconography, Hokusai, Asian, Chinese, you'll see these birds proliferating in the art. So how can something be so symbolic and so important, and yet almost allowed to disappear? These guys always get bad press. The icons of death. But yet they're nature's cleaners. And to understand the stories, understand why they're so important. This guy is certainly uncanny. He's an antelope that can't be kept in captivity, is critically endangered. This proboscis nose. I photographed in Russia, but they go right across to China. Well, this incredible creature lives in total darkness in Croatia, in the limestone caves. It survived the asteroid that finished off most of the dinosaurs, bar the non-avian ones. And survived that, but it's struggling to survive the pollution and the deforestation we have today. Another critically called the Ohm, a salamander. The rarest tortoise in the world, the plowshare tortoise from Madagascar. This is a crazy story. They thought they were extinct, and then in the 1980s, they were rediscovered, and they invited Gerald Durrell, who at that time had developed a trust for endangered animals, to start a project there. Now, more than nearly 50 years later, they're still struggling to stop these guys disappearing. In fact, they have to engrave the shells to stop the illegal wildlife taking them out of the wild. There's only 500 left in the wild. And at the breeding center, the nursery, they had a break-in, and something like 20% of the species were found in a suitcase in Bangkok airport. So the crazy thing is, they have armed police guard outside the nursery today just to stop that happening. I mean, and then this really goes back to Sudan, and this is my picture of Sudan, and I feel that Amy's works powerfully because it connects the people story. And when I was in the States recently, in Seattle at the Woodland Park Zoo, the director of the zoo said that the most powerful connection people had was when they were talking to the people who care for the animals, hearing their story. The empathy of understanding the story of the people looking after the animals is very, very important. But for me, it was a humbling experience to look at the loss of an animal, the last male northern white rhino, and think, how did we get to that point? And it is a painful process of being the witness to that moment. There are many contradictions. This is a pie tamarin from Manaus in Brazil, the capital. Yet I suspect not many of you recognize the species. But if I said Yoda, Star Wars, instant recognition. How can the virtual be more recognizable than the actual? This is nuts. And this is why we must connect people to nature. The cultural critic, Akira Mizoto-Lippert, I thought so eloquently put it. Modernity can be defined by the disappearance of wildlife from humanity's habitat and by its reappearance of the same in humanity's reflections on itself. Now, this is very pertinent on the next project. This is a Spix macaw, one of the 4 South American blue parrots. It became extinct in the wild in the 1980s due to the destroying of the habitat, mostly because of goats, and they spent years getting the habitat back. But these were the captive breeding program in Germany, where I photographed them. Now, what's crazy is we went back to reintroduce the bird, which was successful and was the first reintroduction of a bird that had been extinct in the wild in human history. But what happened was that on the day we released the bird, they projected it on the same monument that's in the film, with the film character Blue was based on the extinct bird in the wild. So there's this play between the Spix macaw that I photographed that was reintroduced and its projection on a monument that was presented in the film. There's a lot of ambiguity, and ambiguity goes back to my point about you almost want to challenge the viewer. What are you looking at? Could it be there's a celestial world, and are they some kind of almost Cupid-like forms? But in fact, they're sea slugs, and that is plankton. But there's something in our imagination that allows that slippage. This is northern Japan, and these are fireflies which flash. They're referred to by the local people as the dancing souls of their ancestors. But think about the film Avatar, Life of Pi. We use bifluorescence as a code or symbol to represent Mother Nature. So there's all these constructs that are part, just like after 9/11, it was more often if there was a big blast and a disaster in Homeland or something, a load of dust would come down, because we've now established a lexicon for that explanation. There's something in our memory, our model of the world. This brings me to the sort of final part of this, which is about the emerging technologies. I'm, as Milton alluded to earlier, one of the photographers whose work many of us are scraped. That means that people take images online and they take them to a data set. There's a huge one called the 5B Leyland B project. It's got 5 billion images in Germany. And then these models take these images and train them so that you can prompt in something and it will spit out an image. So in my case, I'm going to run through that and show you. But because of my profile, my style has been imitated, which I'm going to discuss how I'm, in a sense, trying to future-proof and respond to that. This cat, by the way, is got mosaicing, where two genes of different groups of genes that come together in the same cat. So you get almost a sense of it like being photoshopped. So you probably wouldn't trust it anyway. But with AI, it's probably even more the case. So this is an actual snow leopard, and this is a prompt. So you put a word in saying, do me a snow leopard with some snow, and it does that. Now, you'll probably say the deepfake on the right and my image, I can tell the difference. Of course you can tell the difference now, but we're just embryonic in terms of these generative technologies. So, for example, you prompt it to say, Eagle by Tim Flach. We haven't asked it to do a particular eagle. We haven't asked it to do a black background or not a black background, but there you go. It chooses a black background. It chooses a picture. This is the deepfake, and this is my image from my book from 2021. So effectively, it's copied my style. Now, keep in mind, I'm speaking of a photographer, but if you're a writer, you're a musician, and in fact, I think they were saying there's a new agency for actors where they're having the first one on their books as an AI actor or generative actor. This is going to profoundly change the way it's going to be paradigm shifts. So this is my book coming out end of the month, the 23rd. And that's actually a real cat. So there you go. It already looks strange, doesn't it? I called it the, I'm masking the essence of being feline is my first line. So in the book, I have to address the uncertainty about my work. Because my style becomes polluted by the fact that AI has imitated me, I have to then respond. So what I've done is, April, who's my assistant here, I put a dongle in the set, and we've documented the shoots, and then we've had to reintroduce the imperfections of the images into the files. And then I'm having to narrate in the videos that are linked through these QR codes. Just to say, my problem was get the cat on the table. You know, anyone got cats? They're hard work, aren't they? Yeah. Keep the cat on the table is a problem. Now, my problem is to prove the cat was ever there. That is crazy. So here's one cat. This is Narnia in is it Evoking? There we go, in Paris. That's crazy, isn't it? I'm actually going to go on a tangent now, because Picasso is one of my heroes. And he said that we shouldn't seek, we should find. We shouldn't seek, we should find. This idea that you don't look, you let things reveal themselves. So when this picture revealed itself, I was then suddenly reminded of Picasso, but also he did Jacqueline, his second wife, where he did these multifaceted pictures of people, lino cuts, a whole series. And I just found myself thinking about the fact that, you shouldn't seek, we shouldn't seek, we should find. This idea that things should reveal themselves beyond your generative model, maybe, but beyond your, almost like you have to step out and just be present. A challenge of being an artist. So this brings me to this picture here. So this is I did this photograph in the Pantanal in Brazil. These jaguars, they look fairly real. But I suspect, because it's quite stylized, that in another few years, you might not even trust that that is a document. So does that mean that as the disappearing wildlife that I alluded to earlier is disappearing, will we know it's disappearing because will we know that we can trust what we're looking at as the evidence of a disappearing world? The historical document is a huge challenge. I was speaking to Fiona Smith from Top Library, which is a kind of archive, and she had all the Windrush pictures, and she knew them really well. She was the archivist. And she said she got these pictures and she didn't recognize the people. And then it only established later that they were deepfakes. The very historical document and evidence of our worlds out there are being contaminated. And this is why, when it comes to how do we make sure that we know something is a deepfake or real, at the moment we're trying to push government to actually, at the point of ingestion, to actually, to make sure that it's evidenced whether they are real or not. This picture is slightly ambiguous, bit romantic, but actually it's a man-made and anthropogenic fire. So the ominous characteristic doesn't come across. So going back to my whole thing about empathy and connection, these hippos, great, they look like stepping stones. I mean, nothing wrong with the picture, but you've got to go right in there. You've got to look right in their eyes and say, feel it. Feel the character and the sentiment of the animal. The same thing with the polar bear, that you've got to feel connected. If pictures just show animals in natural habitat, they are important, but you've got to grab attention and then discuss the ecological drivers. That is the forces and pressures, be it climate change with these guys, and tell the story. Not that wildlife photography hasn't got a place, but we've got to recognize that we've got to make nature personal and relatable, just like the images of the Syrian crisis and the boy on the beach. Relatable, punch to the consciousness. It's never before been more important to connect us to nature, and that our future depends on it. Thank you.